how's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be taking a look at The Year Without a Santa Claus. This is from 1974, produced and directed by Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass. And yes, this is another classic Rankin and Bass stop-motion animated Christmas special. That's pretty fun. This one stars Shirley Booth and Mickey Rooney, as well as Dick Shawn, and is based on a book by Phyllis McGinley. Now, this one I don't remember getting played as much as a lot of the other classics. I mean, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty, Little Drummer Boy got played a lot, and of course, if you're talking the Santa ones, Santa Claus is Coming to Town was the big one. This is one that I get that it's not quite the grade A Gold Star classics of the others, but this is still a really good one, and I do wish they play it more. And I really like looking through this complete 18 film collection and getting to experience the whole catalog, because I got to see this a few times when I was little, I believe. I know that the song I'm Mr. White Christmas, that got stuck in my head all the time and is an absolute classic Rankin and Bass song, but I really wish they played this one more because there's some cool, interesting little moments, especially when we get towards the end and we get Mr. Heat Miser and Mr. Cold Miser, and we get some fun, weird little fantasy stuff. But that being said, I see why this isn't quite the grade A Gold Star classic that a lot of the other ones are. I mean, there are some problems with the story and the pacing. I mean, the end problem that Mrs. Claus goes way out of her way to solve, it turns out she didn't really need to do that, and we as the audience already know she didn't need to do that. So most of the climax is her trying to solve a problem that's already been solved. And I will say, for a lot of the middle of the movie, we're stuck in Southtown, USA, and it's not super Christmassy there. It's like just a regular suburban town, and I'm like, you know, I really like when the Rankin and Bass Christmas specials bring us super, super Christmassy stuff, and that's why the beginning and the end of the movie, when we get more into that fantastical realm, is so much better. And there's also a bunch of little logical things that don't quite make sense in here. So yeah, it's not perfect, but it still is a fun little ride, and even though it's not the absolute classics that some are, I mean, it's worth watching just for I'm Mr. White Christmas alone, and there are some really good moments. But I guess in order to analyze it a little further, I do want to take a look at some plot elements and dig down a little deeper. I'll be avoiding the end, and I'll try not to do any major spoilers, but let's break down and analyze a few things. We open up with it being close to Christmas, and Santa Claus is feeling sick. There's this elf doctor character that is super, super grumbly and is upset and says things like, oh, the kids don't really care anymore, why bother? And this is going to sadly get into Santa's head. He says he's been thinking about these things for a while now, and says, hey, who really cares? A lot of people don't believe in me. I'm just not gonna do this whole Christmas thing anymore. And I think this feeling really struck me, not just this coming from Santa Claus, but the idea that I've seen this in real life where, I mean, I put way too much into Christmas, and I'll admit that. Like, I always hope, because so much of the year gets so bad, and I have all these fond memories of Christmas, I always hope that it turns into this just great, wonderful source of happiness. And then in turn, when people are like, dude, I'm too tired, I don't know if we can do this, do we have to? That always messes with me, and now to see it coming from Santa, although that being said, in a post-2020 world, we're like, dude, if you're sick, don't travel the globe. I totally get that. But we get Mrs. Claus stepping in, and she does this song about, well, what if I could be Santa Claus? And she, like, puts on his coat and stuffs it with, like, a pillow. And I'm like, fine. That's a good solution. You shouldn't have this system where if this one guy can't do it, the whole thing's canceled. You do need backups and contingency plans, and I think you can do it, Miss Claus. But then two elves come in and say, "Oh, wow, what are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, nothing, never mind, let's go find Santa." And I'm like, why? Why did you just discount this solution, Mrs. Claus? You had it. Why did we sing the whole song and then you're just like, nah? Well, Mrs. Claus decides she has these two elves, Jingle and Jangle, and says, "You two get on Vixen there, go into the world, and find Santa something to illustrate the positivity of Christmas and why what he's doing matters." Boy, that's a super vague instruction, but I hope they'll figure it out. I do want to say a few things with these characters. Jingle and Jangle are okay. They just don't have the best material to work with. The jokes just aren't that great, and it's more like, you know, I'm the serious one, but not too mean, and then the other one's like the silly one, but again, doesn't have great jokes, and they just kind of do goofy voices. And also, Vixen is a baby reindeer this time around. Wasn't Vixen established as a grown-up reindeer in the past? This leads us into the uncomfortable Christmas truth. Santa's immortal. The reindeer are not. This is the next Vixen. Turns out the other one went and got retired. It never says this in the short, but that's the only thing that makes sense, assuming these are all in continuity with each other. Anyway, they decide to go out and have their first encounter with Heat Miser and Cold Miser as they're battling for territory. And this is a brief introduction of characters that will come into play much later in the story, but I really do like them. They're big and fanciful, and the puppets are actually larger than the other puppets, so when you see them together, it's weird, these puppets towering over each other. They have great songs, and the way they fight and bicker, it's really fun. And again, the adult in me watching whenever they're like, "Oh, the heat has the south and the cold has the north," and I'm like, well, that's really more the equator than the south, because you go far enough south, you'll get the South Pole, but I get that equator can't be worked into songs as easily, so I'll let it pass. Whatever. They eventually get to Southtown, and they'll find that people are just kind of grumpy there. I guess the writers didn't know about Southern hospitality. Whatever, there's some good people, but the first few people they meet are super, super angry, and they'll eventually meet this kid that doesn't believe in Santa anymore. And it's sort of like, oh, you know, I should be positive, I should find my inner child. I get this character, but in a world where Santa's as public as he is in this one, like when he got sick, he literally put out a press release. So the news has a press release from Santa. Presumably the parents find gifts under the tree they didn't buy. In a world like this, it's kind of dumb not to believe in Santa. But whatever, they start to talk and eventually get into some shenanigans that will lead to more of the plot later, and eventually Santa and Mrs. Claus will find their way to Southtown. Santa especially finds his way there kind of easily, but eventually the Clauses are going to try to figure this thing out, and as I said earlier, Mrs. Claus winds up going on this huge plot thread that she doesn't really need to go on because Santa fixes it super easy. And whatever though, that kind of destroys some dramatic tension, but whatever. When the thing gets going back into its fantasy, that's where Rankin and Bass is at its classics. And the whole time I'm watching this, I'm like, interesting setup. We do get caught in Southtown a little bit too long, but then we get to where they go to Cold Miser, and they're like, oh, he's kind of a showman, and the doors open up, and he starts singing I'm Mr. White Christmas. That's when the special heats up again. And it does lead to a very cool ending that I really did like. I think it's what, Blue Christmas they wind up playing, and overall, it hits it out pretty strong. So yeah, there are some pacing issues and some things that don't work, but overall, this is a fun one. Even if it's not quite as good as Rankin and Bass's best, it still is pretty cool, and I still have a lot on here that I haven't seen yet, and I really am interested in working my way through a few more of these specials during this Christmas, and hopefully we find some really cool stuff in there. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist on the bottom. This should be my Rankin and Bass playlist, where you can see me talk about other of their specials. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Relevant playlist here. Have a good day now.